The human brain creates enough electrical impulses in a single day to power a low-wattage light bulb for 24 hours. This constant hum of energy helps explain why mental overload feels so physically exhausting, as if the mind carries a tangible weight. It is estimated that the average person currently consumes the equivalent of 34 gigabytes of information every single day, a volume sufficient to crash a computer from just a few decades ago. If you are seeking a quiet space to process that volume and rest your mind, please gently press the like button and subscribe for more soothing science for sleep. Beyond just passive data, researchers suggest we make up to 35,000 remotely conscious decisions within a single waking period, from what to wear to which email to open first. While the subconscious mind is vast and capable, your conscious mind can actually only process about 60 bits of information per second. When that limited channel is flooded, we experience a cognitive bottleneck, often described as brain fog. It is crucial to remember that this sensation is not a sign of personal weakness or a lack of willpower, but rather a fundamental biological limit. Your brain is designed to filter out the irrelevant, but in a modern environment saturated with notifications, bright lights, and endless choices, the filter becomes clogged. This state of overwhelm triggers a physiological response where the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for logic and planning, actually reduces its activity to conserve energy. You might feel a distinct pressure behind the eyes or a sudden inability to recall simple words. This is the neural equivalent of a circuit breaker tripping to prevent the wires from overheating. It is fascinating to consider that the brain weighs only about 3 pounds, yet it consumes 20% of the body's total oxygen supply. When you are mentally overloaded, that energy demand spikes, leaving the rest of the body feeling lethargic. We often mistake this mental saturation for physical tiredness, leading us to seek stimulants that ironically accelerate the neural firing, causing the congestion. When under this cognitive strain, the brain releases cortisol, which can temporarily inhibit the hippocampus, the region vital for forming new memories. Furthermore, every time you switch focus between two tasks, there is a metabolic cost, often referred to as the switch cost, which drains glucose from the brain. This fragmentation of attention can reduce cognitive efficiency by nearly 40%. We are effectively operating ancient hardware in a hyper-digital world, attempting to process a year's worth of sensory input from the Middle Ages in a mere afternoon. To understand why this sensory deluge feels so heavy, we must look at the specific machinery responsible for holding it all up. This biological headquarters is located just behind your forehead in the prefrontal cortex. In evolutionary terms, this is the newest addition to the human brain, often described as the seat of executive function. It is here that you plan for the future, regulate your emotions, and decide which email to answer first. However, this sophisticated command center has a significant design flaw when placed in a modern context. It is remarkably energy inefficient and easily exhausted. While the brain makes up only about 2% of your total body weight, it consumes roughly 20% of your body's metabolic energy. Every time you force yourself to focus on a spreadsheet, ignore a distracting notification, or make a complex decision, you are burning through a limited supply of glucose and oxygen. This is why a day spent sitting in a chair solving problems can leave you feeling as physically depleted as if you had run a marathon. The sensation of mental fatigue is not metaphorical. It is a physiological signal that your neural fuel tanks are running low. Neural processing is a biological act that produces waste products, and without breaks to flush these toxins away, the signaling pathways become sluggish. This metabolic limit is compounded by a strict bandwidth cap.
Information theory suggests that the conscious mind can process approximately 120 bits of information per second. That might sound like a decent amount until you realize that simply listening to a person speak and understanding their words consumes about 60 bits per second. This effectively means you can barely listen to two people talking at once before your processing power is maxed out. When you try to multitask, perhaps listening to a podcast while reading the news, you are not actually doing both things simultaneously. You are rapidly switching your limited bandwidth back and forth, a process that incurs a switching cost every single time, further draining that precious glucose reserve. We often overestimate our capacity because we confuse conscious attention with the brain's autopilot. Deep below the prefrontal cortex, ancient structures like the basal ganglia can process millions of bits of information per second, handling walking, breathing, and habitual movements without you ever thinking about them. This creates the illusion that we are limitless. We feel we can walk, talk, check our phones, and navigate traffic all at once.
But the moment a novel problem arises, a sudden detour or a confusing text message, the autopilot disengages and the limited, energy-hungry prefrontal cortex must take over. When the demands of the environment exceed that 120-bit limit, the result is instantaneous cognitive traffic. We begin to miss details, our emotional regulation falters, and the world seems to blur into a chaotic noise that we simply cannot filter out. This noise becomes overwhelming because the mental workspace we use to organize it is shockingly small. To understand why we hit this wall so hard, we have to look back at a seminal moment in the history of psychology. In 1956, a cognitive psychologist named George Miller published a paper that became one of the most cited studies in the field. He proposed that the average human mind can hold about 7 items at once, give or take 2. This concept became known as the magical number 7, and it stood as the gold standard for decades. It is the primary reason telephone numbers were originally designed to be 7 digits long, excluding the area code, because that was believed to be the maximum string of random numbers a person could hold in their head while dialing. However, modern neuroscience has actually tightened this constraint significantly. While Miller was right about our ability to hold 7 items if we merely repeat them like a parrot, the number of items we can actually process and manipulate at one time is much lower. Current research, particularly the work of psychologist Nelson Cowan, suggests the real limit of pure working memory is closer to 4 chunks of information. Think of your working memory not as a vast library, but as a very small whiteboard, or perhaps a dimly lit stage in a massive theater. The rest of your knowledge, everything you have ever learned, sits in the audience in the dark. That is your long-term memory. But working memory is the single spotlight on the stage. Only a few actors can stand in that light at any given time. If a 5th actor walks onto the stage to deliver a line, one of the previous 4 must be shoved off into the wings. This replacement process is brutal and immediate. Unless you actively rehearse the information, repeating a phone number over and over in your internal monologue using what is called the phonological loop, the trace of that memory decays in about 15 to 30 seconds. It effectively evaporates. This creates a bottleneck that psychologists refer to as cognitive load theory. Developed by John Sweller in the late 80s, this theory explains that our mental bandwidth is finite and easily clogged. He distinguished between different types of weight we carry. There is intrinsic load, which is just how hard a specific task is naturally. Solving a complex calculus problem has a high intrinsic load because the elements interact in complicated ways. But then there is extraneous load, which is the unnecessary effort your brain spends trying to make sense of poorly presented information. If you are trying to learn a new concept from a book, but the font is difficult to read, or the room is too noisy, or your phone is buzzing on the table, your brain has to burn precious energy just to filter that sensory input. That energy is stolen directly from the limited supply meant for understanding.
When we force too much onto that tiny mental stage, we experience a cognitive overload that feels less like simple forgetfulness and more like a system failure. The whiteboard is full, the marker ink is smearing, and nothing new can be written down until something else is erased. We try to compensate by chunking information, grouping individual letters into words or words into phrases, which allows us to treat a complex group as a single actor on the stage. But even with this trick, the biological limits remain strict. This strictness becomes undeniable when we attempt to defy it through the modern habit of multitasking. While we often prize the ability to juggle several responsibilities simultaneously, neurologists have mapped the circuits of attention and found that for high-focus activities, true multitasking is biologically impossible. The brain is not a parallel processor like a computer with multiple cores. It is a serial processor, capable of conscious focus on only one high-level concept at a time. When we think we are doing two things at once, such as writing an email while listening to a conversation, we are actually engaging in rapid task switching. We are toggling our attention back and forth with incredible speed, yet this agility comes with a hidden tax known as the switch cost. Every time you shift your focus from one objective to another, your brain must go through a complex two-step metabolic process. First, it must execute goal shifting, where the executive control center decides to disengage from the current task and turn toward the new one. Second, it must perform rule activation, effectively turning off the neurological rules required for the first task and warming up the rule set for the second.
While this happens in tenths of a second, these micro delays add up, compounding over the course of a day to consume up to 40% of your productive time. It is like constantly stopping and restarting an engine. You burn more fuel in the ignition than you would by simply cruising. During the exact moment of the switch, the brain enters a state known as the attentional blink. For a span of roughly 200 to 500 milliseconds, your perception effectively goes offline. You are cognitively blind during the gap, missing information entirely. This is why texting while driving is so perilous. It is not just that your eyes are off the road, but that your brain has physically suspended the processing of visual data while it reorients the rule sets between the phone and the car. You are navigating the world in a strobe light, seeing only snapshots rather than a continuous stream of reality. Despite this inefficiency, we persist because of a powerful illusion of competence. The brain lacks a sensory mechanism to track the quality of our attention in real time. Instead, it rewards the sensation of novelty. Every time we respond to a new notification or switch to a new tab, the brain's reward center releases a small dose of dopamine. We feel busy, and we mistake this busyness for effectiveness. This feedback loop creates a paradoxical state where we feel we are accomplishing more, while objective measures show our IQ temporarily drops by an average of 10 points, a cognitive decline similar to losing a full night of sleep. Furthermore, this rapid toggling changes how memories are stored. When you focus on a single task, information flows into the hippocampus, which handles flexible, deep knowledge. When you multitask, that same information is often rerouted to the striatum, a region specialized for learning new physical skills and muscle memory. The result is that you might get the job done, but you struggle to recall the details or apply the concepts later, leaving you with a sense of mental fog. I wonder if you have ever noticed that specific kind of hazy exhaustion that sets in after an hour of jumping between open tabs, a feeling quite different from the satisfying fatigue of deep work. This is the weight of attention residue, where fragments of the previous task clutter your mind, preventing you from fully inhabiting the present moment. This prevention of presence is the core of what psychologists term the switch cost effect, a cognitive phenomenon explaining why we feel so drained even when our physical activity has been minimal. It reveals that multitasking is in reality a myth. The human brain does not perform two complex tasks simultaneously, but rather toggles between them with rapid, exhausting instability. Every time you shift your focus from a report to a notification, or from a conversation to a checking account, you pay a specific toll. This is not merely a metaphor for lost time, but a measurable biological tax levied on your mental energy reserves.
When you attempt to change tasks, your brain must go through a two-stage process. First, it must execute goal shifting, where you explicitly decide to do this instead of that. And second, it must perform rule activation, where it turns off the cognitive rules for the old task and warms up the rules for the new one. While this happens in fractions of a second, these micro delays accumulate rapidly. If you are switching back and forth every few minutes, you are essentially forcing your brain to undergo a complete reboot of its working memory repeatedly. Over the course of a day, these tiny restarts can consume up to 40% of your productive time. It is akin to driving a car in stop-and-go traffic. The engine runs, the fuel burns, and the effort is high, yet the distance traveled is frustratingly short. The most deceptive aspect of the switch cost effect is the illusion of the quick check. We often convince ourselves that glancing at an inbox or reading a single text message takes only a moment, believing we can snap right back to where we left off. However, attention does not work like a light switch that can be flicked on and off instantly. It functions more like a heavy freight train that requires significant time to build momentum. When that momentum is broken, getting back up to speed is a slow, laborious process. Research into this recovery time suggests that after a distraction, it can take an average of 23 minutes to return to the original task with the same level of deep focus you had before the interruption. During that recovery period, your work is shallower, your comprehension is lower, and your error rate is higher. You are technically working, but you are operating in a state of cognitive lag, hauling the heavy mental baggage of the interruption while trying to reconnect with your primary goal. This constant recalibration explains why a day filled with small interruptions often feels more exhausting than a day of intense, singular focus.
The brain burns significantly more oxygenated glucose, its primary fuel source, when it is forced to constantly shift gears. The result is a specific type of mental fatigue where you feel busy and overwhelmed, yet logically know you haven't completed the heavy lifting you set out to do. You are left with the sensation of having run a marathon, despite having barely moved from your chair, simply because the internal machinery of your attention has been grinding against the friction of constant change. This grinding consumes a resource that is far more biological than we often admit, burning through a finite supply of mental energy that psychologists refer to as ego depletion. We tend to view our willpower as a character trait, something steady and reliable that defines who we are, but neuroscience suggests it operates more like a muscle that fatigues with repetition. Every time you inhibit a desire, choose between two options, or regulate an emotion, you are spending a physiological currency. When that account runs low, the brain shifts into a conservation mode that dramatically alters your behavior, often without your conscious realization. Perhaps the most striking illustration of this phenomenon comes from a now famous study analyzing over 1,000 parole rulings made by judges over a 10-month period. These were experienced professionals dedicated to impartiality, yet the data revealed a startling pattern tied not to the law, but to the clock. In the early morning, prisoners appeared to have a roughly 65% chance of being granted parole. However, as the morning wore on and the judges made case after case, that probability dropped steadily, eventually crashing to near zero just before the lunch break. After the judges returned from eating, replenished and rested, the probability of a favorable ruling spiked back up to 65%, only to degrade again as the afternoon dragged on. The implication is profound. When the decision-making machinery is tired, the brain defaults to the path of least resistance. In the case of the courtroom, the path of least resistance is the status quo, keeping the prisoner locked up, because granting parole requires an active calculation of risk that a depleted mind simply cannot afford to make. You likely experience a lower stakes version of this judicial fatigue every single evening. Deciding what to make for dinner can feel surprisingly overwhelming. It is not that you have lost your ability to process information, but rather that your executive function has hit a wall. During the day, you may have successfully resisted the urge to check social media, navigated a tense meeting, and decided on the order of tasks for a project. Each of these was a withdrawal from your willpower bank. By the time you are standing in your kitchen at 7 o'clock, the tank is empty. The brain, desperate to conserve energy, struggles to weigh the variables of health, taste, preparation time, and cost. Consequently, you were more likely to default to habit, order the same takeout as last time, or eat something simple and unhealthy, purely because the decision cost is lower. This creates a direct link between the volume of choices you make and your ability to control impulses. It explains why supermarkets place candy and gum at the checkout line. By the time you reach the register, you have walked through aisles containing tens of thousands of distinct items, making tiny, unconscious decisions about price, brand, and quantity with every step. You have essentially walked a gauntlet of choice. When you finally arrive at the register, your decision fatigue is at its peak, leaving your impulse control at its weakest. You are statistically less able to resist the sugar because the part of your brain responsible for saying no is exhausted from saying yes to everything else in your cart. That exhaustion isn't just a lack of willpower, it is a tangible depletion of biological resources. Even though your brain represents only about 2% of your total body weight, it is essentially a greedy engine, demanding roughly 20% of your body's resting metabolic energy. It runs primarily on glucose, a simple sugar that powers the electrical storms of your thoughts. Unlike your muscles, which can store excess energy as glycogen from massive reserves, the brain has very limited local storage capacity. It relies on a constant, uninterrupted delivery of fuel through the bloodstream, moment by moment. When you are engaged in a high-demand cognitive task, like solving a complex problem, navigating a new city, or suppressing the urge to buy that candy bar, specific regions of your brain become metabolically expensive real estate. They consume glucose rapidly, leaving less fuel for other functions. This is why, after a long exam or a difficult conversation, you might crave sugar. Your brain is signaling a desperate need to restock its shelves. You might wonder, however, why sitting in a stationary chair while thinking hard leaves you feeling physically shattered, often more so than if you had spent the day walking. It turns out that intense mental focus triggers physiological changes that mirror physical exertion. Your heart rate variability decreases, your blood pressure may shift, and your muscles often hold unconscious tension for hours. But the true weight of mental fatigue is chemical.
Every time a neuron fires to process a thought, it creates metabolic waste products. One of the most significant of these is a molecule called adenosine. You can think of adenosine as the exhaust fumes left behind by a running engine. As you go through your day, thinking, deciding, and focusing, this chemical slowly accumulates in the cerebrospinal fluid and the spaces between your cells. As the levels of adenosine rise, the molecules drift towards specific receptors that act like a dimmer switch on your neural activity. It is a biological mandate telling you that the system is overheating. Recent theories specifically point to the accumulation of glutamate, a primary neurotransmitter, in the lateral prefrontal cortex. When you push your mind too hard for too long, the concentration of glutamate becomes difficult for the brain to clear away efficiently. To protect itself from this toxic buildup, the brain effectively forces you to stop working. It does this by making the task feel significantly harder and more unpleasant, shifting your preference toward low-effort, low-cost activities. That mental fog you feel isn't a failure of character. It is a sophisticated safety valve, ensuring you don't burn out the machinery before it has a chance to clean itself during sleep. This maintenance is crucial because the moment you wake up, your brain begins a relentless process of exclusion known as sensory gating. At any given second, your senses are bombarded by millions of bits of data, from the pressure of your shoes against your feet to the subtle hum of electricity in the walls and the temperature of the air on your skin. If you were consciously aware of every single input simultaneously, you would remain paralyzed by the sheer volume of information, unable to prioritize a single thought or action. To prevent this, a structure deep within the brain acts as a sophisticated bouncer, deciding which sensory signals are important enough to reach your conscious awareness and which should be inhibited or ignored. It is interesting to consider if there is a specific noise or distraction that you personally find impossible to filter out, perhaps a sound that instantly breaks your concentration no matter how hard you try to ignore it. Feel free to share that experience in the comments as we continue exploring how the brain manages this noise.
This filtering capability is perhaps most famously demonstrated in what psychologists call the cocktail party effect. Imagine standing in a crowded, boisterous room filled with dozens of overlapping conversations, clinking glasses, and laughter. Despite the chaotic acoustic environment, your brain has the remarkable ability to suppress the background din and isolate the voice of the single person standing in front of you. It can instantly boost the signal of that one voice while dampening the noise floor of the room, a feat of audio engineering that even advanced computers struggle to replicate perfectly. However, this act of inhibition requires significant cognitive fuel. Creating a quiet internal space amidst a loud external world is an active, energy-consuming process, not a passive one. This brings us to the crux of mental overload. When your cognitive resources are drained by stress or fatigue, the physical mechanism of sensory gating begins to malfunction. As your energy reserves deplete, the brain loses its ability to effectively block out the irrelevant data. The gate essentially gets stuck open. This is why, after a long, stressful day, you might find yourself suddenly hypersensitive to small annoyances that wouldn't normally bother you. The sound of a person chewing, the brightness of the overhead lights, or the tag on your shirt can suddenly feel overwhelmingly intense. It is not that these stimuli have become physically stronger, but rather that your brain's ability to dampen them has weakened. You are experiencing the raw, unfiltered reality of the world, and without the protective buffer of sensory gating, the environment feels abrasive and demanding. This biological reality explains why irritability is such a common symptom of burnout. It is not necessarily an emotional reaction, but a sensory one. Your brain is simply taking in too much data because the filter has gone offline. When the prefrontal cortex is exhausted, it can no longer send the necessary ignore signals to the sensory processing centers. Consequently, every sound and sight demands equal attention, leaving you with a profound sense of scattering. This sensation of being scattered is not a personal failure, but rather the result of running ancient hardware in a hyper-modern world. We are essentially living with Paleolithic brains, navigating a digital landscape, creating a friction that evolutionary biologists call a mismatch. For 99% of human history, information was scarce and high value. The primary survival skill was noticing change in the immediate environment. A sudden rustle in the tall grass, a shift in the wind, or a flash of color in the forest was not just interesting, it was often a matter of life and death. Because of this, the human brain evolved a powerful mechanism known as the novelty bias. Your biology is wired to reward you with a tiny, pleasurable hit of dopamine every time you shift your focus to something new.
In the wild, this chemical bribe ensured that you paid attention to the environment, helping you spot a predator or locate a ripe fruit tree. Distraction was a survival advantage. However, in the modern era, this once protective instinct has been weaponized against your peace of mind. The environment now offers an infinite supply of rustling grass in the form of notifications, breaking news tickers, and vibrating pockets. We are effectively hallucinating threats and opportunities all day long, keeping the nervous system in a state of low-grade, chronic hyperarousal that it was never designed to sustain for more than a few minutes at a time. Consider the sheer volume of social input compared to what our ancestors experienced. Anthropologists estimate that a human being living 10,000 years ago might meet perhaps 100 or 200 people in an entire lifetime. Their social circle was small, stable, and manageable. Today, you might scroll past the faces of 500 strangers before you even finish your morning coffee. The brain, which evolved to care deeply about social standing within a small tribe, now tries to process the emotional states, opinions, and status of thousands of people daily. It treats this information as socially critical because it lacks the biological software update to understand that these digital interactions do not affect your immediate survival. This overload is further compounded by the very light that carries the information.
For eons, the only source of high-energy blue light was the sun. When the sun went down, blue light vanished from the world, replaced by the warm, low-energy glow of fire or moonlight. This shift in the light spectrum was the primary signal for the body to wind down. Specialized non-visual cells in your retina detect this specific blue spectrum and send signals directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock of the brain. When you stare into a bright screen after dark, you are physically tricking this ancient clock into believing it is high noon. The production of melatonin is aggressively suppressed, and the brain remains in a state of vigilant alertness. You may feel tired, but your biology is screaming that it is time to be awake and alert. This creates a dangerous cycle where the brain is overstimulated by data, yet chemically blocked from entering the deep restorative states necessary to process that data, leaving the waste products of neural activity to accumulate overnight. While we often view this cognitive congestion as a strictly modern penalty for our digital conveniences, the history of human thought reveals that the sensation of drowning in information is actually centuries old. Long before the blue light of a smartphone kept anyone awake, Roman philosophers were already sounding the alarm about the dangers of intellectual gluttony. In the 1st century, Seneca the Younger complained bitterly about the sheer volume of books being produced, arguing that the abundance of reading material was a distraction that burdened the learner rather than instructing them. To the ancient Stoic, a multitude of scrolls created a scattered mind, preventing the deep, singular focus required for true wisdom, suggesting that the anxiety of having too much to read predates the internet by nearly 2,000 years. This anxiety intensified exponentially with the arrival of the printing press, which shattered the natural bottleneck of hand-copied manuscripts. By the 16th century, scholars were gripped by a new form of panic, realizing for the first time that it was physically impossible to read every important work published within a single human lifetime. The Swiss bibliographer Conrad Gessner, who heroically attempted to catalog all existing books, lamented what he called the confusing and harmful abundance of text. Intellectuals of the era described the accumulation of knowledge not as a treasure, but as a dense, unnavigable forest, fearing that the unmanageable flood of new ideas would lead not to enlightenment, but to a chaotic disintegration of truth. As the timeline moved into the industrial age, this psychological pressure transformed into a medical diagnosis. The invention of the telegraph and the steam engine collapsed the protective buffers of time and distance, delivering news from across the globe in mere moments and demanding immediate attention. By 1881, the neurologist George Beard had coined the term neurasthenia, or nervous exhaustion, to describe a specific fatigue he observed in modern citizens. He explicitly blamed the telegraph, the steam engine, and the periodic press for draining the limited reservoir of nervous energy in the human body. Doctors of the Victorian era argued that the brain was akin to an electrical battery that was being depleted faster than it could recharge, bankrupted by the need to be constantly punctual and aware of events happening thousands of miles away. It was a crisis of bandwidth long before the concept of bandwidth existed, proving that the feeling of overload is not necessarily about the volume of data we possess, but the relentless speed at which we are forced to metabolize it. This metabolism has accelerated because the friction of distance has completely evaporated.
Where messages once relied on the physical speed of a galloping horse or a steamship crossing the Atlantic, today they travel at the speed of light through glass fibers hair-thin and buried deep beneath the ocean floor. We have moved from a world where information had a physical weight and a transit time to a reality where the transfer of data is effectively instantaneous, creating a scenario where the only bottleneck left in the communication loop is the human mind itself. The sheer volume of this instantaneous data is difficult to conceptualize without feeling a sense of vertigo. It is estimated that every single minute, users upload 500 hours of video to major streaming platforms, while nearly 200 million emails are sent in that same 60-second window. In the time it takes to take a single deep breath, the digital world expands by terabytes, creating a reservoir of content so vast that a single person could not consume the output of one day, even if they watched screens for a dozen lifetimes. This shift in volume has fundamentally altered the structure of our days. For most of modern history, news was a finite product. The morning newspaper had a front page and, crucially, a back page. When you reached the end, the news was finished, and you could go about your day with a sense of completion. Even the early evening news broadcasts had a sign-off, a clear delineation between the events of the world and the rest of your evening. Today, the news cycle has been replaced by the news stream, a linear feed that has no beginning and no end. The technology of the infinite scroll, designed to eliminate the pause where a user might decide to stop, ensures that there is no stopping cue, no moment of closure where the brain can signal that it has gathered enough information to be safe. The content of this stream is also engineered to trigger a specific physiological response. In the natural world, bright colors and sudden movements are signals of danger or opportunity, evolving to catch the eye of a hunter or a gatherer. Modern information design hijacks this ancient orienting reflex. The breaking news banner, almost universally rendered in bright red with high contrast text, mimics nature's warning signals, forcing the brain to allocate attention regardless of the information's actual relevance to our immediate survival. This triggers a microdose of cortisol, the stress hormone, preparing the body for a threat that is purely informational. When this happens dozens of times a day, the body remains in a state of low-grade hyperarousal, constantly scanning for threats in a digital environment where the threats never cease, but also never physically arrive. It is a biological mismatch of the highest order, where our ancient survival mechanisms are being tripped by pixels rather than predators. This biological vulnerability is not an accidental byproduct of modern life, but rather the foundation of a sophisticated marketplace known as the attention economy. In this invisible exchange, your focus is the primary currency, harvested by algorithms that understand your psychological triggers better than you do yourself. It is crucial to realize that the most popular applications on your phone were likely designed by engineers who studied casino psychology just as closely as they studied computer science. Consider the mechanism of the infinite scroll, a ubiquitous design feature invented in 2006 that radically changed the physics of how we consume information. Before this innovation, digital content had structural boundaries. You had to click a button to turn a page, offering a natural stopping cue where your brain could pause and decide to disengage. The infinite scroll removed that friction entirely, creating a bottomless stream that leverages the same psychological principle found in slot machines, known technically as variable ratio reinforcement. Your brain never knows if the next swipe will reveal something boring, something upsetting, or something delightful, so it keeps pulling the lever in anticipation of a reward. This unpredictability keeps the dopamine system firing, bypassing the rational planning centers of the prefrontal cortex and speaking directly to the impulsive limbic system. Have you ever opened your phone to check the weather and found yourself 20 minutes later deep in a social media feed without knowing how you got there? That is the system working exactly as intended, turning the user into a passive consumer of their own time. The visual language of these interfaces is equally deliberate, particularly in the use of specific color wavelengths to hijack your awareness. Notification badges are almost universally red for a specific evolutionary reason. In nature, red is rarely a background color. It signals blood, fire, or poisonous berries, effectively screaming at the human brain to pay attention immediately to survive. A blue or green notification might feel like a polite suggestion, but a red dot feels like an emergency that creates a subtle, nagging psychological itch until it is cleared.
These design choices contribute to a phenomenon researchers call continuous partial attention, where we never fully relax but never fully focus, hovering in a state of perpetual receptivity. The technology is engineered to reduce the friction of entry to zero, while making the friction of exit immensely difficult. Features like autoplay on video platforms are the digital equivalent of someone refilling your plate the moment you finish a bite,
removing the conscious choice to stop eating. By eliminating the pause between episodes or clips, the platform makes continue watching the default option, requiring an active effort of will to resist rather than an active choice to proceed. This constant stream of unrequested content taxes the brain's executive function, the mental CEO responsible for self-regulation, until it essentially fatigues and surrenders to the flow, leaving us mentally bloated yet strangely unsatisfied. This dissatisfaction arises because the mechanisms driving our consumption are not designed to provide contentment, but rather to perpetuate the search itself. We often operate under the popular misconception that dopamine is the molecule of pleasure, believing that a spike in this neurotransmitter equates to a feeling of joy or satisfaction. In reality, neuroscientists define dopamine closer to a molecule of desire, motivation, and calculation. It does not control the enjoyment of the feast, it controls the ferocity of the hunt. When we scroll through infinite feeds, we are not gathering resources that satiate us, but rather triggering a primal foraging loop that has been hijacked by carefully engineered algorithms. F. Skinner, in the mid-20th century, Skinner placed animals in boxes with a lever that delivered food pellets. When the lever delivered a pellet every single time it was pressed, the animals would press it only when hungry. However, when the mechanism was altered so that the lever delivered food only unpredictably, sometimes after 3 presses, sometimes after 20, and sometimes not at all, the animals began to press the lever compulsively, ignoring their actual hunger levels in favor of the gambling-like thrill of uncertainty. Modern technology applies this exact psychological framework to the digital interface. The pull to refresh action on a smartphone screen is the digital equivalent of Skinner's lever, and the split-second pause before the new content loads is the spinning wheel of the slot machine. That moment of delay is biologically critical. Studies in neurobiology suggest that dopamine levels are actually highest during the anticipation of the reward, rather than the receipt of the reward itself. The brain spikes in chemical arousal while the screen is loading, driven by the possibility that the next image or headline might be the most interesting thing we have seen all day. Once the content actually appears, the dopamine levels drop significantly, often plummeting below baseline if the content is merely average. This rapid chemical drop creates a sensation of subtle disappointment or emptiness, which the brain immediately attempts to resolve by triggering the urge to scroll again. This creates a powerful, self-perpetuating cycle of seeking, finding, and crashing. We are not looking at the screen to enjoy what is there, we are looking to relieve the minor withdrawal symptoms caused by the previous swipe. This cycle is a primary contributor to mental overload because it keeps the brain in a state of high-alert hyperarousal, constantly scanning for threats or opportunities, even while the physical body is stationary and safe. The disconnect between the brain's frantic chemical activity and the body's passive state creates a unique form of exhaustion. We burn through glucose and neural resources, processing thousands of micro-decisions and micro-disappointments, leaving the executive centers of the mind depleted. The result is a paradox where the brain is simultaneously overstimulated by input and starved for genuine resolving satisfaction, unable to reach the natural stopping point that comes with completing a tangible task. This absence of closure triggers a very specific and persistent psychological mechanism that keeps the mind in a state of suspended animation. In the late 1920s, a psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik observed something peculiar while sitting in a busy Viennese restaurant. She noticed that the waiters could recall complex, detailed orders for large tables with perfect clarity as long as the bill remained unpaid. The information was held in a state of active tension, readily accessible and vivid. However, the moment the transaction was complete and the customer left, that information vanished from the waiter's memory almost instantly. This phenomenon, now known as the Zeigarnik effect, revealed that the human brain is hardwired to retain information about unfinished tasks while discarding data about completed ones. The mind treats an uncompleted task like a cliffhanger in a story, maintaining a low-level cognitive vigilance to ensure you don't forget it. In the context of a busy restaurant, this is a helpful adaptation, but in the modern landscape of digital overload, it becomes a source of chronic exhaustion. Every unread email, every vague reminder to call a relative, and every started but unfinished project acts as an open loop. These loops do not simply sit quietly in the archives of your memory. They consume active energy, running in the background like smartphone apps that drain the battery even when the screen is off.
This creates a subtle but constant background hum of anxiety, a psychological itch that prevents the brain from entering a state of true rest. Even when you try to relax, the unconscious mind continues to refresh these open loops, checking and rechecking them to ensure they haven't been lost, which fragments your focus and degrades the quality of your downtime. Fortunately, there is a biological loophole in this system that offers a profound sense of relief. Research suggests that you do not actually need to complete a task to silence the Zeigarnik effect. You simply need to have a concrete plan for its completion. This is why the act of writing things down is so effective at reducing mental load. When you transfer a worry or a to-do item from your mind onto a piece of paper, you are engaging in a process called cognitive offloading. You are signaling to your brain that the information is safe, recorded, and scheduled. The mind trusts the paper in a way it does not trust its own short-term memory, and once the plan is externalized, the brain releases the tension it was holding. It stops looping the thought, effectively checking the mental box and allowing the neural circuitry to power down. This sense of relief is crucial because while our brains struggle to hold on to unwritten tasks, they struggle even more profoundly when faced with an abundance of unmade decisions. There is a deep-seated belief in modern society that having more options equates to more freedom, and that more freedom inevitably leads to greater well-being. However, from a neurological perspective, an excess of choice often results in the exact opposite, a state of paralysis that drains our cognitive battery faster than almost any other mental activity. This phenomenon is widely known as the paradox of choice, a concept that explains why standing in front of a well-stocked grocery aisle can feel surprisingly exhausting. The most famous demonstration of this cognitive short-circuiting is a study conducted by psychologists Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper, often referred to simply as the jam jar experiment. In a high-end supermarket, researchers set up a tasting booth for exotic jams. On one day, they displayed a selection of 24 different flavors. On another day, they displayed only 6. The results revealed a fascinating quirk of human psychology. While the table with 24 jams attracted significantly more attention, stopping twice as many customers as the smaller display, the sales told a completely different story. When faced with 24 options, the brain became overwhelmed by the sheer number of comparisons required to make the right choice. The computational effort was so high that most people simply abandoned the task entirely. Only 3% of the shoppers bought a jar. In contrast, at the table with only 6 jams, the decision was manageable, the cognitive load was light, and 30% of the shoppers made a purchase. This suggests that our brains have a strict limit on how many variables they can juggle before the process of choosing becomes stressful rather than liberating. The stress comes not just from the effort of comparing, but from the fear of making the wrong call. This introduces the concept of opportunity cost. When you choose one item out of a selection of 3, you are rejecting 2 alternatives. When you choose 1 out of 100, you are rejecting 99 potential paths to satisfaction. The weight of those 99 unchosen options creates a background hum of anxiety, a subtle fear that the perfect choice was left on the shelf. This mental burden is heaviest for a specific personality type known in psychology as the maximizer. Maximizers are individuals who are driven by the need to make the absolute best possible decision. They will read every review, compare every price, and analyze every specification, expending immense amounts of mental energy to ensure optimization. While they may objectively make better choices, studies show they are consistently less happy with the outcome than their counterparts, the satisficers. Satisficers are those who have a set of criteria for what they need, and as soon as they find an option that meets those standards, they select it and move on without looking back. They do not worry about whether a slightly better option existed, which saves them from the draining cycle of second-guessing and regret. By voluntarily restricting our options or adopting a satisficing mindset, we effectively install a governor on our own mental engine, preventing it from overheating over trivial decisions and preserving that energy for rest.
This preservation of energy extends beyond our own internal choices to the very atmosphere we inhabit, particularly the digital atmosphere where we are constantly exposed to the internal states of others. This brings us to the phenomenon of emotional contagion, a well-documented psychological occurrence where we unconsciously mimic and synchronize our emotions with the people around us. In the physical world, this mechanism helps us bond with friends or comfort a grieving family member, acting as a social glue that holds tribes together. However, in the modern online environment, this adaptive trait creates a unique and pervasive form of exhaustion.
We are no longer just empathizing with a close circle of loved ones. We are often absorbing the high-intensity emotions of thousands of strangers in a matter of minutes. This rapid-fire empathy is powered by mirror neurons, a fascinating set of brain cells that were originally discovered in macaques in the 1990s and have since revolutionized our understanding of human connection. These neurons are distinct because they fire both when an individual performs an action and when they observe someone else performing the same action. When you watch a video of someone slipping on ice, your brain lights up in specific motor areas as if you were the one falling. More significantly, when you read a heated, angry comment thread or watch a video of someone in distress, your brain simulates the physiological state of that emotion. It releases trace amounts of stress hormones like cortisol, preparing your body for a conflict or crisis that isn't actually happening to you. Your mind is effectively rehearsing the stress of the world, treating pixels on a screen as immediate physical reality. Before we explore the deeper consequences of this constant simulation, I'm curious to know what helps you reset. In contrast to this digital noise, is there a specific nostalgic memory or a simple, quiet activity from your past that instantly makes you feel lighter and more relaxed when you think of it? Feel free to share that peaceful moment in the comments. Returning to the mechanics of our minds, this continuous activation of mirror neurons leads to what psychologists call compassion fatigue or empathy overload. It is important to remember that our biological hardware evolved to process the triumphs and tragedies of a small tribe, usually consisting of no more than 150 people. Today, however, our screens present us with the crises of billions. When we scroll through a standard social media feed, we might see a heartwarming reunion followed immediately by a report of a global tragedy, then a humorous meme, and then a personal story of injustice. This sequence requires the brain to perform emotional gymnastics, switching from joy to sorrow to amusement to anger in the span of mere seconds. This switching cost is immense and metabolically expensive. Eventually, the brain hits a limit and activates a numbness response, often mistaken for apathy. This is not a moral failing, but a protective neural mechanism designed to prevent total system failure. We simply run out of the neurochemical resources required to care, leaving us feeling hollowed out and inexplicably tired, not from physical exertion, but from the invisible weight of carrying the emotional data of the entire world. When we finally attempt to lay that weight down, however, we often find that true rest remains elusive, largely because we have inadvertently disrupted the brain's natural cycle of recovery. For decades, neuroscientists operated under the assumption that when a person stopped performing a specific task, like solving a math problem, reading a map, or listening to instructions, their brain simply went quiet, powering down like a car engine idling at a red light. It was not until the turn of the 21st century that researchers stumbled upon a startling contradiction. They observed that when subjects were told to simply do nothing, to let their minds wander without an objective, a massive, interconnected constellation of brain regions suddenly roared to life, consuming nearly as much energy as when the brain was engaged in complex problem solving. This system is known as the default mode network, and it functions as the neurological bedrock of our internal lives. Far from being a waste of time, this state of wakeful rest is the brain's essential maintenance cycle. It is during these periods of unfocused drifting that the mind consolidates memories, shuffles through past experiences to extract lessons, and simulates future scenarios to prepare us for what lies ahead. When the default mode network is active, you are essentially engaging in autobiographical processing. You are telling yourself the story of your own life, knitting together the disparate events of the day into a cohesive narrative that makes sense. However, in our current state of continuous mental overload, we rarely allow this system to fully come online. There is a seesaw relationship in the brain between the task-positive network, which handles external attention, and the default mode network, which handles internal reflection. Generally, they cannot both be active at the same time. We have culturally reclassified boredom as a crisis to be averted rather than a biological necessity to be protected. The moment a gap appears in our day, standing in an elevator, waiting for a kettle to boil, or sitting in a parked car, we instinctively reach for a screen to fill the void with new data. This impulse keeps the brain locked in executive function mode, focused entirely on the external world, and effectively suppresses the default mode network. By systematically eliminating boredom, we are inadvertently dismantling the very mechanism required to process our emotions and generate original thoughts.
It is pumped deeply into the brain tissue, riding along the outside of blood vessels in a mechanism driven by the rhythmic pulsing of your arteries. This fluid washes through the brain, mixing with the interstitial fluid that sits between cells and physically flushes out the toxic byproducts that have accumulated during the day. It is a literal brainwashing in the most positive sense of the word. One of the primary waste products being swept away is a protein called amyloid beta. When amyloid beta builds up, it can form sticky plaques that gum up the neural networks, a biological hallmark often associated with long-term cognitive decline. But even in the short term, the presence of this waste is what creates that feeling of a fuzzy head, the inability to focus, and the sensation of mental heaviness that follows a period of intense work. This illuminates why mental overload is so inextricably linked to sleep deprivation. If you are constantly stimulated, effectively overriding your natural fatigue with caffeine or blue light, you are keeping the city gates locked. The cleaning crew cannot enter. You wake up with yesterday's waste still cluttering your neural pathways, layering new information on top of old debris. It is why you cannot simply rest your eyes to recover from true cognitive burnout. You must undergo the full biological cycle of unconsciousness to physically remove the debris of thought. The glymphatic system relies on the slow, steady arterial pumping that happens best during deep, non-REM sleep to drive this fluid exchange. If your sleep is shallow, fragmented by stress, or shortened by a schedule that prioritizes productivity over biology, the washing cycle is interrupted. You are asking your brain to run a marathon on a track covered in hurdles and debris. The feeling of burnout is not just an emotion, it is the physical sensation of a biological system clogged with the byproducts of its own exertion, waiting desperately for the silence required to wash itself clean. Once the physical waste is cleared, a second equally vital process begins in the quiet dark. This is the nightly sorting of your mental inventory, a mechanism designed to save you from the chaotic accumulation of the day. During your waking hours, every conversation, every street sign, and every notification you glanced at was temporarily scribbled onto a fragile mental notepad located in the hippocampus. This small, seahorse-shaped structure deep in the brain acts as a rapid-fire recording device, but it has a strictly limited capacity. It is meant to be a holding bay, not a permanent library. If you have ever felt that sensation of your brain being full or unable to absorb one more fact by late afternoon, it is likely because this temporary storage was reaching its saturation point, unable to etch any new information until it offloads what it already holds. As you drift into the deeper stages of rest, a complex dialogue opens up between the hippocampus and the neocortex, the wrinkly outer layer of the brain responsible for higher-level processing and long-term storage. Neuroscientists often compare this to moving files from a precarious, temporary cache onto a massive, secure hard drive. This transfer allows the fragile, fresh memories of the day to be stabilized and integrated into the complex web of everything else you have ever known. It is a physical transformation of the memory trace itself, moving it from a state where it can be easily disrupted to a state where it becomes durable. What is truly fascinating is how this happens. During slow-wave sleep, the brain generates bursts of electrical activity called sharp-wave ripples. These ripples are essentially your brain hitting the replay button on the day's events, but it does so at hyperspeed.
Studies suggest that during these bursts, neural patterns fire in the same sequence as they did when you experienced the event, but roughly 20 times faster. You are unknowingly reliving your life in fast forward, stripping away the immediate emotional intensity while extracting the core data. Yet consolidation is not just about keeping things, it is equally about destroying them to prevent future overload. There is a biological necessity to forget. This process is known as synaptic pruning. During the day, your neurons sprout new connections like wild vines to bridge new ideas. If kept unchecked, this thicket would become too dense for signals to travel efficiently, leading to a noisy, overactive brain that consumes far too much energy. To combat this, specialized cells act as gardeners during sleep. They shrink the synapses, effectively eating away the weak or unnecessary connections formed during the day. This downscaling ensures that only the most vital pathways remain strong, literally creating physical space in the brain for tomorrow's learning. This pruning and organizing is why the old advice to sleep on it is scientifically sound. It is not just a pause, it's an active restructuring of data. While the conscious mind is offline, the sleeping brain looks for hidden connections between seemingly unrelated facts, often solving complex problems that baffled you while you were awake.
It creates a simplified map of reality, discarding the specific noise to reveal the general rule. Without this nightly purge and reorganization, the mental clutter would simply pile up, leaving you in a permanent state of cognitive congestion where nothing new can enter. Just as sleep acts as a profound internal reset, the physical environment exerts a similar power over your cognitive load, specifically through the complex geometry of the natural world. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, your visual system developed in a setting dominated by self-repeating patterns known as fractals. These are shapes that retain the same statistical complexity whether you zoom in or zoom out, found everywhere from the branching veins of a fern to the jagged profile of a mountain range, and even in the chaotic structure of a cumulus cloud. The modern world, by contrast, is built on Euclidean geometry, straight lines, perfect circles, and flat planes. While efficient for construction, these shapes are surprisingly taxing for the brain to process. Because the visual cortex is not naturally tuned to interpret these rigid, non-repeating angles, it burns more oxygen and glucose just trying to make sense of a city street or a sterile office block. This mismatch creates a subtle, low-grade strain that contributes silently to mental fatigue, adding weight to a mind that is likely already overburdened. However, when you step into a forest or gaze at the horizon over the ocean, a phenomenon known as fractal fluency takes over. Your eyes navigate these complex organic patterns with almost zero effort because the structure of the retina itself mimics these fractal arrangements. Research suggests that the human brain has a preferred fractal dimension, a specific level of density and complexity that triggers an immediate physiological relaxation response. 5 on the fractal scale, which is exactly the density found in most tree canopies and cloud formations. When you view these patterns, your brain shifts its electrical activity, generating a surge of alpha waves. This specific frequency is associated with a state of wakeful relaxation and internal calm, distinct from drowsiness but far removed from stress. Essentially, the brain interprets these natural patterns as a signal that it can stop processing data so intensely. This ease of processing is why a 20-minute walk in a park can do more for your focus than a nap. You are feeding your eyes the visual diet they were designed to consume. This mechanism supports what psychologists Stephen and Rachel Kaplan identified as attention restoration theory. They distinguished between 2 types of focus: directed attention and soft fascination. Directed attention is what you use to write an email, drive a car, or solve a problem. It is voluntary, effortful, and easily depleted, leading to the sensation of being mentally fried. Nature, however, engages soft fascination. The motion of grass blowing in the wind or the play of sunlight on water captures your interest effortlessly, holding your attention without draining your cognitive reserves. This state of soft fascination allows the neural circuits responsible for directed attention to rest and replenish. The biological imperative for this connection is so strong that even a simulated view can lower heart rate and blood pressure. The mere presence of the color green, specifically in the wavelengths reflected by chlorophyll, has been shown to reduce the production of cortisol. It signals to the primitive sectors of the mind that the environment is rich in resources and devoid of immediate predators, allowing the hypervigilant monitoring systems of the mind to finally stand down. In a state of overload, the brain does not just want rest, it craves the specific mathematical comfort of the natural world to remind it of where it belongs. Psychologists refer to this particular mode of engagement as soft fascination, a term that perfectly captures the gentle, involuntary grip nature holds on our attention. When you are analyzing data, listening to a lecture, or navigating through a crowded city street, your brain is burning a tremendous amount of energy, not just to focus, but to inhibit distractions. You are constantly telling your mind not to look at the flashing advertisement, not to listen to the background conversation, and not to daydream. This act of blocking out the world to prioritize a single task depletes the chemicals in the prefrontal cortex, leading to irritability and the inability to think clearly. Soft fascination is the remedy because it flips this dynamic entirely. When you watch the rhythmic motion of tide pools, the drifting of clouds, or the rustling of leaves in a breeze, your attention is held without any effort of will. You do not have to force yourself to watch a fire burn. The movement naturally draws the eye. Because the stimulus is interesting enough to occupy the mind, but not clear enough to require problem solving, it allows the executive control center of the brain to finally go offline. It provides a rest period that sleep alone sometimes cannot provide, effectively recharging the battery of your directed attention so that you can return to complex tasks with renewed clarity. This restorative process is aided by the physical geometry of the natural world, specifically the presence of the horizon.
In built environments, our vision is perpetually arrested by walls, monitors, and text, forcing the lens of the eye to maintain a tight, short-range focus. This creates a chronic tension in the eye muscles that is inextricably linked to mental fatigue. This physical relaxation triggers a psychological response, signaling to the nervous system that the environment is vast and predictable. There is a primal safety in being able to see for miles, a luxury that our ancestors relied on for survival, and that our modern brains still equate with a deep physiological sense of peace. The horizon line acts as a stabilizing anchor, a visual reference point that organizes the chaos of the world into a simple, manageable divide between earth and sky. While the eyes find rest in that divide, the ears remain perpetually vigilant, acting as the sentinel that never truly sleeps. Even during the deepest phases of rest, the auditory cortex remains active, scanning the environment for threats, a survival mechanism inherited from a time when the snap of a twig could mean the approach of a predator. This constant monitoring means that the modern soundscape of urban life, humming refrigerators, distant sirens, and the low rumble of traffic, creates a state of chronic low-level arousal in the brain. This phenomenon is known as acoustic load, and it consumes a surprising amount of mental energy. To maintain focus in a noisy environment, the brain must actively filter out irrelevant sounds, a process that draws upon the same limited cognitive resources used for problem-solving and memory retention. When the background noise consists of human speech or mechanical grinding, the effort required to ignore it increases significantly. Traffic noise, specifically, contains non-fractal patterns that are alien to the natural world. Because these sounds are irregular and lack the soothing mathematical predictability of wind or water, the brain struggles to habituate to them, treating them as unsolved problems that require constant subconscious attention. In contrast, the sounds of nature act as a balm for this exhausted attention system. This is not merely a poetic preference, but a physiological response to specific acoustic signatures. Birdsong, for instance, is one of the most potent triggers for acoustic restoration.
For hundreds of thousands of years, the singing of birds has indicated a safe, predator-free environment. When the birds are singing, the immediate area is secure. Upon hearing this specific frequency range and rhythm, the brain lowers its guard, reducing the production of cortisol and allowing the parasympathetic nervous system to initiate a state of recovery. Water sounds function similarly, but through a different mechanism known as acoustic masking. The broad-spectrum sound of a rushing stream or falling rain covers up sudden, sharp noises that might otherwise trigger a startle response. The rhythmic consistency of ocean waves, often rolling in at roughly 12 cycles per minute, naturally entrains the brain's own rhythms, encouraging a shift toward the slower alpha and theta waves associated with relaxation and the early stages of sleep. This natural preference explains the science behind the different colors of noise used for relaxation. While white noise contains all audible frequencies played at the same intensity, sounding like harsh radio static, it can sometimes be too stimulating for the sensitive listener. The brain often prefers pink noise. In pink noise, the power per hertz decreases as the frequency increases, meaning the lower, deeper tones are more prominent. This specific balance creates a softer, deeper sound profile that mathematically mimics the frequency distribution found in nature, such as the rustling of leaves, the steady beat of heart rhythms, and the roar of a distant waterfall. Studies suggest that pink noise is superior to white noise for enhancing deep, slow-wave sleep because it synchronizes with brain waves rather than just drowning them out. This synchronization is not only vital for sleep, but also serves as a model for how the brain achieves its peak performance during waking hours, specifically in a state known as deep work. Deep work is the ability to focus without distraction on a cognitively demanding task, a skill that allows you to quickly master complicated information and produce better results in less time. However, this is not merely a matter of willpower or discipline. It is a distinct physiological event. When you lock into a state of intense concentration, you are initiating a specific biological process called myelination. Inside your brain, information travels through neurons, but the speed and strength of those signals depend heavily on how well the neural pathways are insulated. When you focus intensely on a single task, completely ignoring the impulse to check a notification or switch tabs, you trigger the activation of specialized cells called oligodendrocytes. These support cells begin to wrap layers of a fatty substance known as myelin around the axons of the neurons you are firing. You can imagine this process like wrapping tape around a leaky water hose. The more layers of myelin you add, the less energy is lost during transmission and the faster the signal travels. High-level skills and profound understanding are physically cemented in the brain through this thickening of the myelin sheath.
However, this biological insulation process is delicate. Every time you succumb to a distraction, even for a few seconds, the process halts. The brain requires sustained, unbroken attention to signal that a specific pathway is important enough to be insulated. This is why the modern habit of constant context switching is so physically draining. When you rapidly shift your attention from a project to an email and back again, you create what researchers call attention residue. A portion of your cognitive resources remains stuck on the previous task, acting like a processing drag on your mind, preventing you from ever reaching the depth required for myelination to occur. Beyond the biology of learning, deep work offers a unique emotional reward that shallow, busy work cannot replicate. The human brain evolved to find satisfaction in tangible, completed objectives, much like our ancestors felt after crafting a sturdy tool or building a shelter. In contrast, the endless, unresolved nature of modern digital communication often leaves us feeling empty and anxious. Deep work provides a sense of finality and competence that triggers a more satisfying neurochemical response, grounding us in the present moment. Finding the environment to achieve this state is often the most difficult step in our noisy world. Some people find their focus is sharpest in the very early hours of the morning before the sun rises, while others retreat to a specific chair in a quiet library or a park bench. I would be curious to hear where you find your moments of absolute stillness. Do you have a favorite quiet place or a specific time of day where the noise of the world finally fades away? Securing that sanctuary is essential because it allows the brain to escape the state of chronic low-level panic induced by information overload. When the mind is allowed to settle into one singular focus, the nervous system down-regulates and the stress of multitasking evaporates, replaced by the profound, quiet satisfaction of functioning exactly as we were designed to. It represents the exact psychological opposite of mental overload. While overload is characterized by a fragmented mind trying to hold on to too many disparate threads, flow is the complete unification of consciousness around a single action. One of the most fascinating features of this state is a phenomenon known as time dilation, where the brain's processing of duration is altered, making hours pass in what feels like mere minutes. This occurs because the neural resources usually dedicated to tracking time are reallocated to the immediate task at hand. Achieving this state requires a very specific set of conditions, often referred to as the flow channel. The activity must present a challenge that is roughly 4% greater than your current skill level. If the challenge is too low, the mind wanders into boredom and begins to seek distractions, leading back to clutter. If the challenge is too high, the nervous system triggers anxiety, which is a precursor to cognitive overload. It is only in that narrow band where difficulty perfectly matches ability that the brain locks in. When this lock occurs, something counterintuitive happens in the brain's physiology. While it feels like our minds are working at maximum capacity, neuroimaging studies reveal that the brain actually slows down certain functions to save energy. This process is called transient hypofrontality. The term hypo means less, and frontality refers to the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for complex planning, decision-making, and crucially, our sense of self. In a state of deep flow, the prefrontal cortex temporarily deactivates. This is significant because this is the home of the inner critic, that nagging voice of doubt and self-consciousness that contributes so heavily to mental fatigue. When this area goes quiet, we are no longer observing ourselves perform, we simply become the performance. This silencing of the self explains why flow is so restful, even when the task is physically or mentally demanding. The energy that is usually burned by self-monitoring, doubt, and the processing of extraneous stimuli is suddenly liberated. The brain shifts from the frantic beta waves of normal waking consciousness, which are associated with active thinking and stress, toward the slower, more rhythmic alpha and theta waves that act as a bridge between the conscious and subconscious mind. Deep within this state, the brain releases a potent cascade of neurochemicals that are rarely found together. Norepinephrine drives focus, dopamine enhances pattern recognition and engagement, endorphins block pain signals, and serotonin provides an afterglow of satisfaction. Perhaps most interestingly, the brain releases anandamide, a neurochemical whose name is derived from the Sanskrit word for bliss, which inhibits our ability to feel fear and promotes lateral thinking. In the context of the modern world, flow acts as a biological reset button. It proves that the human mind does not suffer from an inability to focus, but rather from an environment that rarely permits the conditions for deep immersion. Where overload is the friction of too many conflicting signals, flow is the frictionless motion of a mind that has found its rhythm, stripping away the unnecessary until only the essential remains.
When this stripping away becomes a habit, it ceases to be merely a temporary mental state and begins to alter the physical landscape of the brain itself. This is the realm of neuroplasticity, where the repetitive action of bringing one's attention back to the present moment physically rewires neural pathways. For decades, scientists believed the adult brain was static, fixed in its structure after childhood, but we now know that how we use our minds determines the architecture of our gray matter.
One of the most significant findings in this field involves the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain located just behind the forehead, which is responsible for higher-order functions like decision-making, concentration, and emotional regulation. Studies using magnetic resonance imaging have shown that consistent mindfulness practice actually leads to a thickening of the prefrontal cortex. Just as a weightlifter builds muscle fiber through resistance, a person practicing focus builds cortical density. This structural reinforcement provides the biological bandwidth necessary to manage the influx of data that typically leads to overload. It explains why seasoned practitioners often seem impervious to the frantic pace of modern environments. Their brains have physically fortified the specific regions required to maintain executive control over their attention. Simultaneously, while the reasoning centers grow stronger, the primitive stress centers undergo a different, equally profound transformation. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep within the brain, acts as the body's alarm system, triggering the fight-or-flight response when it perceives a threat. In the modern world, this threat is rarely a predator. It is usually an overflowing email inbox, a jarring notification, or the anxiety of a tight schedule. In a state of chronic mental overload, the amygdala is often enlarged and hyperreactive. However, as the prefrontal cortex thickens through observation and presence, the amygdala has been observed to shrink in volume. This reduction correlates directly with a reported decrease in stress levels. It is not simply that the mind is thinking different thoughts. The physical machinery responsible for generating fear and anxiety becomes smaller and less dominant. This biological restructuring quiets the default mode network, the brain system active when our minds are wandering, worrying about the future, or ruminating on the past. An overactive default mode network is a primary engine of mental fatigue, constantly churning through hypothetical scenarios. By dampening this activity, the brain stops wasting energy on background noise. The result of these physiological changes is the creation of a critical pause. Between the arrival of a stimulus, a sudden noise, a demanding request, a flash of frustration, and the emotional response to it, a space opens up. In a brain conditioned by overload, this space is non-existent. The reaction is instant and automatic. In a brain reshaped by mindfulness, the strengthened prefrontal cortex and the regulated amygdala work in tandem to extend that gap, granting the split-second freedom to choose a response rather than falling victim to a reflex. This is where the true antidote to overload lives, not in changing the world outside, but in fortifying the biology within. To understand this internal fortification, we must look at the clock, but not the one hanging on the wall or the digital digits glowing on a screen. While most of us are familiar with the circadian rhythm, the large 24-hour cycle that dictates our sleep and wakefulness, fewer realize that the brain operates on a much shorter, faster loop throughout the day. These are known as ultradian rhythms, distinct biological cycles that occur multiple times within a single 24-hour period. If you have ever felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of fatigue wash over you, exactly an hour and a half after starting a focused task, you have intimately experienced the turning of this tide. Research suggests that the human brain can only maintain high-frequency focus for approximately 90 to 120 minutes before it naturally craves a reset. This phenomenon is often referred to as the basic rest-activity cycle. It was originally identified by the pioneering sleep researcher Nathaniel Kleitman, who discovered that the 90-minute cycles of REM and non-REM sleep we experience at night actually continued during the day, just in a different form. During the upswing of this cycle, mental overload is easily kept at bay. The brain is pumping mostly high-frequency electrical signals, glucose is being utilized efficiently, and focus feels relatively effortless. However, biology invariably demands a toll for this performance. Eventually, the peak gives way to a trough. This is the physiological dip, a span of roughly 20 minutes where the body attempts to flush out metabolic waste products and replenish depleted neurotransmitters.
In a state of nature, or perhaps in a slower era, we would instinctively pause, stare into the distance, stretch, or rest. The body physically manifests this need through fidgeting, hunger, drowsiness, or loss of concentration. But in a modern culture that prizes linear, machine-like productivity, we often misinterpret this natural biological signal as a lack of discipline, a character flaw, or a sudden onset of boredom.
When we feel that urge to zone out or reach for a sugary snack, it is actually the brain signaling that its ultradian peak has ended. The specific danger of mental overload arises not when we get tired, but when we forcibly override this rhythm. Instead of taking a brief restorative break to close the cycle, we often reach for caffeine, or essentially bully ourselves into pushing through the fog. This forces the body to tap into emergency reserves, releasing stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline to simulate energy. While this works in the short term, it creates a chaotic internal environment. You are essentially revving the engine while the oil light is flashing. By ignoring the need for that 20-minute reset, the brain never clears the metabolic debris from the previous cycle, causing the sensation of overload to compound heavily as the hours accumulate. To halt this compounding effect, psychology introduces a concept often termed cognitive minimalism. Unlike the architectural trend of bare white walls and empty rooms, this form of minimalism takes place entirely within the neural architecture of your mind. It operates on the premise that attention is a finite economic resource, perhaps the most valuable currency you possess, and spending it on low-value information depletes the account before you ever reach the decisions that actually matter. This approach suggests that a cluttered mind is just as stressful as a cluttered home, yet it is far more difficult to escape because you carry the mess with you wherever you go. This leads directly to the practice of an information diet. Just as the digestive system struggles when overwhelmed by processed, nutrient-poor food, the cognitive system falters when fed a steady stream of fragmented, high-intensity, but ultimately empty data points. Neuroscientists have observed that the brain treats every notification, every breaking news headline, and every social media refresh as a new problem to be solved. Even if you scroll past an image in a fraction of a second, your visual cortex has processed it, categorized it, and your emotional centers have briefly engaged with it. This creates a state known as continuous partial attention, where you are never fully present anywhere because a portion of your processing power is permanently reserved for the next potential distraction. By consciously restricting this intake, you are not closing yourself off from the world, but rather choosing to engage with it on your own terms. Think of your mind as a high-security art gallery. Currently, many of us leave the front doors wide open, allowing anyone to walk in, hang a poster on the wall, or graffiti the exhibits. Cognitive minimalism involves posting a security guard at the entrance. You become the curator of your own consciousness. This means ruthlessly auditing the sources of noise in your life and asking whether a specific newsletter, a particular group chat, or a certain habit of checking the phone first thing in the morning adds clarity or merely adds static. When you reduce the sheer volume of inputs, the signal-to-noise ratio improves dramatically. You begin to notice that your thoughts have more texture and depth because they aren't being constantly interrupted by the digital equivalent of an erratic strobe light. This curation inevitably fosters a psychological state known as JOMO, or the joy of missing out. It is the sophisticated antidote to the anxiety-ridden fear of missing out that drives so much of our compulsive behavior. JOMO is the quiet satisfaction found in knowing that you do not need to know everything. It is the relief of realizing that the vast majority of urgent updates are not urgent at all, but merely loud. When you embrace the joy of missing out, you reclaim the bandwidth required for deep focus and, crucially, for deep rest. You are giving your brain permission to stop scanning the horizon for threats or opportunities. This mental stillness is the precursor to true relaxation, creating a safe, quiet space where the mind can finally lay down its burdens and transition into the restorative cycles of sleep without the lingering echo of 1,000 unfinished digital conversations. To silence those echoes, the mind requires a different mode of engagement, a deliberate return to the art of single tasking. This is not merely a productivity strategy, but a profound physiological reset. When we strip away the layers of multitasking, we discover that the human brain was never truly designed to juggle simultaneous cognitive loads. It functions best and rests best when the spotlight of attention illuminates a single point. Consider the traditional Japanese tea ceremony known as chado, or the way of tea, which serves as the ultimate embodiment of this principle. In this ritual, there is no checking of a clock, no planning for the next appointment, and certainly no digital intrusion. Every movement is scripted, intentional, and performed with absolute devotion to the present moment. The host focuses entirely on the precise temperature of the water, the rhythmic whisking of the matcha powder, and the exact placement of the ceramic bowl. For the guest, the duty is simply to receive the cup, feel its warmth against the palms, and taste the earthiness of the tea.
In this closed loop of action and sensation, the brain's default mode network, the circuit often responsible for wandering thoughts and anxiety about the past or future, finally goes quiet. The sensory input is rich but uncomplicated. The sound of boiling water, often described in these ceremonies as the wind passing through pine needles, becomes the only soundtrack necessary. This depth of focus creates a psychological anchor, grounding the participant in the immediate reality of the physical world. The body responds to this singular focus with immediate gratitude. Studies on flow states and deep concentration reveal that when the mind locks onto one task without distraction, the sympathetic nervous system, which drives our fight-or-flight response, begins to down-regulate. Blood pressure lowers and the heart rate decelerates, falling into a coherent, steady rhythm. Respiration deepens naturally. This is the biological opposite of the shallow, frantic breathing patterns associated with fractured attention. By doing just one thing, whether it is folding laundry, sketching a figure, or carefully washing a dish, we signal to our primitive brain that we are safe, that there is no predator on the horizon requiring us to scan the environment. Perhaps the most magical byproduct of single tasking, however, is the distortion of time itself. In a state of mental overload, hours evaporate in a blur of unremembered scrolling and rapid task switching. We reach the end of the day feeling as though we haven't actually lived through it. Conversely, when we inhabit a moment fully, time seems to expand. A subjective slowing occurs, where 10 minutes spent in deep observation of a single object or completely absorbed in a tactile craft like woodworking or knitting feels significantly longer and richer than an hour spent rapidly toggling between tabs. This implies that the feeling of rushing, of never having enough time, is often a symptom of attention management rather than a lack of hours. By narrowing our aperture, we actually widen our experience of life. We reclaim the texture of existence, noticing the grain of the wood, the steam rising from a mug, or the sensation of breath entering the lungs, turning even the most mundane actions into restorative meditations. This shift moves us toward a future where cognitive health is treated with the same rigor and respect as cardiovascular fitness. Just as society once realized the hidden dangers of a sedentary body, we are collectively waking up to the risks of a besieged mind, a consciousness that is constantly reacting to stimuli rather than reflecting on them. Emerging trends in the field of digital wellness suggest that the next great health revolution will focus entirely on the hygiene of our attention. We are already seeing the early stages of this transition with the quantified self movement, which is expanding beyond simple step counters to track focus minutes and screen-free intervals, validating the scientific truth that mental rest is a biologically productive state. Governments are beginning to respond to this reality as well. Nations like France, Portugal, and parts of Canada have introduced or actively considered
right to disconnect legislations, legal frameworks that forbid employers from demanding attention via email or text after working hours. This frames mental downtime not as a personal luxury, but as a fundamental human right, acknowledging that the brain requires a guaranteed off switch to enact the molecular cleanup processes that prevent burnout. In the world of design, the philosophy of calm technology is gaining traction, advocating for devices that recede gracefully into the background rather than clamoring for the foreground of our awareness. The objective is to dismantle the aggressive tactics of the attention economy, which treats human focus as a raw commodity to be mined, and replace it with an environment that respects the biological limits of the prefrontal cortex. We are beginning to understand that attention is a currency far more valuable than money. While economies can print more currency, you cannot manufacture more time or focus. Architects are increasingly requested to design spaces with acoustic dampening and signal blocking materials, creating physical zones where digital overload is literally impossible. It is a deliberate embrace of the joy of missing out, a celebration of the unobserved moment where the brain can simply be. This cultural pivot suggests that in the future, the ultimate status symbol will not be hyperconnectivity, but the capacity for deep, uninterrupted thought. It changes how we prepare for rest. Instead of doom scrolling until exhaustion hits, the focus shifts to cognitive tapering, a gradual reduction of inputs as the sun goes down to mimic the natural rhythms of twilight. Speaking of that transition, I would love to know, does your mind tend to replay the day's information as you lie in bed, or have you found a specific way to unplug that leads to peaceful dreams? This conscious management of our mental intake allows the brain's default mode network to engage properly, facilitating the kind of wandering, creative thought that solves complex problems. By valuing the limits of our cognition, we reclaim the ability to truly think, turning the tide against overload and finding sanctuary in our own headspace. This sanctuary is where we begin to dismantle the outdated definition of productivity that has driven us to the brink of exhaustion.
For nearly a century, we have measured human output through the lens of the Industrial Revolution, treating the mind like a machine that should run continuously until it runs out of fuel. However, neuroscience suggests that true productivity is not a measure of volume or speed, but of clarity and sustainability. The brain operates on specific biological rhythms, known as ultradian rhythms, which dictate that for every 90 minutes of high-intensity focus, the mind requires approximately 20 minutes of downtime to replenish its neurochemical resources. When we push past this natural limit in an attempt to do more, we enter a state of diminishing returns, where tasks take longer, mistakes increase, and the brain begins to simulate productivity while actually spinning its wheels. This shifts our understanding of rest, framing it not as the opposite of work, but as an essential partner to it. In the high-performance world of athletics, recovery is considered part of the training regimen. Yet in mental labor, we often view a break as a sign of weakness or wasted time. This cultural stigma ignores the fact that the brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's metabolic energy, despite representing only 2% of its weight. To maintain this immense energy consumption without overheating or accumulating toxic waste products, the brain relies on periods of idleness to perform maintenance that is impossible during states of high alertness. One of the most fascinating discoveries in this field is the existence of the glymphatic system, a waste clearance pathway that essentially washes the brain. During sleep and states of deep rest, the space between brain cells actually expands, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flow through and flush out the metabolic byproducts that accumulate during thinking, including proteins linked to neurodegenerative diseases. This means that when you are resting, you are biologically active at a cellular level, performing a cleaning function that is critical for long-term cognitive health. Furthermore, silence itself appears to have a regenerative quality. Studies on the hippocampus, the region of the brain associated with memory and learning, have shown that periods of silence can stimulate neurogenesis, the growth of new brain cells. While constant sensory input keeps the brain in a reactive state, silence allows it to switch into a generative mode. Therefore, idleness is not merely the absence of activity, but the presence of a specific kind of restorative biological process. By accepting that doing nothing is a valid and necessary form of doing something, we step away from the panic of mental overload and move toward a more sustainable way of existing, where our value is defined not by how busy we keep our hands, but by the health and clarity of our minds. This restoration is not merely a wishful thought, but a biological promise deeply encoded in our nervous system. We often fear that the damage inflicted by the modern world is permanent, that our attention spans are irrevocably shattered by the fragmentation of digital life, or that our capacity for deep, sustained focus has been lost to the dopamine loops of endless scrolling. However, the science of the brain offers a much more hopeful reality. Your mind is plastic, resilient, and incredibly adaptive. Just as it learned to juggle the chaotic inputs of a hyper-connected society, it can relearn the rhythms of peace. It is constantly waiting for the permission to heal, to repair the neural pathways of concentration, and to wash away the metabolic waste products that accumulate during those long hours of cognitive strain. The journey from overload to clarity does not require a complete abandonment of technology or a retreat to a mountaintop, but rather a gentle, consistent commitment to small moments of stillness, proving to ourselves that the world will continue turning even when we are not there to watch it. As we let go of the need to be constantly informed, constantly entertained, and constantly available, a profound shift occurs. The frantic urgency that once drove our thoughts begins to settle, much like sediment sinking to the bottom of a disturbed glass of water until the liquid becomes clear again. We begin to realize that the noise was never inside us to begin with. It was merely a storm passing through. When that storm breaks, what remains is the spaciousness of your own consciousness, a quiet room where you are free to simply exist without agenda. In this state, the pressure to perform dissolves. You are no longer defined by the speed of your processing or the volume of your output, but by the depth of your presence. Imagine for a moment that your mind is a wide, open landscape that has finally been cleared of clutter. The heavy fog of too much information lifts, revealing a horizon that is calm and steady. There are no notifications demanding your attention here, no endless lists of tasks, and no fear of missing out. There is only the gentle rhythm of your own awareness, steady and assured. This is the quiet mind, not an empty void, but a rich, fertile ground where true creativity and rest can finally take root.
It is a place you can return to whenever the weight of the world feels too heavy. A sanctuary built within your own being that is always accessible, no matter how loud the external world becomes. If this exploration of mental peace has helped you find a moment of calm amidst the noise, and you wish to continue supporting this journey toward a quieter, more thoughtful life, please consider subscribing to join us for future moments of reflection. Ultimately, the antidote to mental overload is not more doing, but the brave act of stopping. It is in the silence that we find ourselves again, reminding us that the most profound wisdom often comes not from learning more, but from the simple, beautiful act of clearing the way for peace.